So the right way to homeschool for every family is for each family to embrace the uniqueness of themselves and to embrace what their goals are. And their goals could be the same exact goals that somebody else has, but it's going to look different. The term family culture, I love to talk about that because every family is different. Every couple is going to be different. And when it's just you and young children, you set the pace for the home. If you're a family that loves to do outdoor adventures, then include that in your homeschool.
Hello and welcome to the Home Edify podcast. My name is Kristen Malfris. Edify means to teach or instruct so as to improve the mind and character. Here we're going to talk about what it takes to raise resilient, courageous, lifelong learners. And I am so excited to tell you about the guest for this week's episode. Her name is Miss Leigh Nguyen. And I have followed Miss Leigh on Instagram. Her Q&As from her account, Little by Little Homeschool, has given me so much insight and so much wisdom into homeschooling and parenting my own children. And I knew I just had to interview her for the podcast and share that wisdom with you guys because she is someone who has raised 3 children, 2 of which she has already launched out into the world. And she is actually the host of her own podcast. It's called Little by Little Homeschool. And if you have a question about homeschooling, I am sure you can find an answer in one of her episodes. She is just jam-packed, full of godly wisdom. And I was so excited to be able to interview her for this episode. You are going to be encouraged. If you're a mom starting out, she is going to make you feel like you can absolutely do this. Okay, so let's get to it. What led you to homeschooling your kiddos?
Well, let's see. Let's go back in time. About 15 years ago, I actually had children in the public school system. I was a product of the public school system, and so that's just what you did. You put your kids in school. So 15 years ago, my daughter was in 2nd grade, and I had a kindergartner, and then I had a toddler, toddler at home, and I always felt like things were a little off. I didn't quite feel settled about sending them to school. I bawled my eyes out the day that she got onto the bus in kindergarten. And I was like, well, this is just normal. It's just how you're supposed to feel. And just, she was having struggles. She just is a very sweet and kind and sensitive child and was loved by all of her classmates and teachers, but it was just the system and the rigors of it, that the testing and everything. And she was just struggling with that because I remember her crying before school and just things never felt right. And then we just kept running into that kind of stuff. My kindergartner was always, we'll say in air quotes, getting in trouble because he was a 5-year-old boy who was actually bored because he kind of figured out reading already. And so didn't want to sit. And so there was just a lot of like practical things. And then I really felt God just kind of laid on my heart, like, why don't you look into homeschooling? And I was like, yeah, no, we don't do that. And I was like, okay, I'll look into it. And I instantly felt at peace when I was like, you know what, maybe that's what we can do. I had one friend that homeschooled, and I remember giving her a call, and the phone call that I never thought I would make to her, because I always said to her, I could never homeschool. You're so brave. I could never do that. And called her and I said, don't tell anybody, but I'm thinking about homeschooling. Because we had a lot of friends in common. So my husband knew. And, but yeah, so she was like, come on over. I'll show you what I do and everything. And so we just kind of went from there. We kept our kids in school for the rest of that school year and then started them the next year. So I started off with a 3rd grader, a 1st grader, and a preschooler. And so the preschooler went to 1 year of preschool because I felt like that's what he had to do. That's what the older two did, because you have to go to preschool, in order to be ready for kindergarten is the thinking. So put him in. And then after a year, I was like, we're not doing this. I can't do this running around and everything. So he's been my product that has, besides that 1 year preschool, which I feel like was play kind of thing. He's gone all the way through. So the oldest 2 have graduated. My daughter is 22 now, and my son is 20. And then my youngest just turned 17. So he's in what we would say his 11th grade year. So he's got the rest of this year and then 1 more year and he'll be done.
Well, congratulations. Wow.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, man. What is it like having 2 that are already out of the house? Like, what are they doing, and how did that feel whenever they finally launched?
Well, so I still have one living at home, the 20-year-old. He would love to move out, but in a practical sense, if you really look into the prices of things, he's like, it doesn't even make sense to me. And so actually my 17-year-old just today, he's doing a consumer math this year. And I was like, these are the things that you really need to know. And so today he was actually working through the budget of how much is an apartment. So he had to do some research on really right here where he lives on how much apartments are. And so we're kind of talking. I said, yeah, now do you know why your brother hasn't moved out? Because the cost, and even the cost is so high, and you just get nothing. And so my 22-year-old, she lives and works at a ministry right now. She's going to be here soon in transition and going to and trying something different. We're not quite sure what she'll probably come home for a little bit and then see where God takes her, see where she kind of lands on things. So the 20-year-old, he owns his own business. And so he's working from home, and he's in and out all day long. And then the 17-year-old, but launching them out was really hard and strange. And not to diminish how any other parent feels when their kids maybe say go off to college or move out or whatever they do after, say, going to public school. Not to diminish that in any way, but I really do think that it was harder. I feel like it's harder because we're together so often and our lives are just so intertwined that, and maybe it's also I'm just sensitive. My husband's kind of like, okay, let's calm down a little bit. But I'm like, they're just my heart walking around out in the world. So I guess I've gotten a little bit more used to it. So my youngest, I'll probably more laid back when he's like, all right, I'm ready to go out and hit the world and take the world on and try some things. So yeah, there was a lot I had to work through with my own feelings and remembering how excited I was at their age to go out and try things and to experience things and to figure out my place in the world. And so I try to remember how I felt when I was 18, 19, 20 plus and apply that to how I deal with them so that I don't want them to be like, oh, mom's so sad. I shouldn't tell her these things that I want to do. And I want them to know that I'm in their corner. Yes, I'm sad for my own selfish reasons, but I'm not sad for where they're going and what they're doing.
Oh my goodness. I couldn't even imagine. I have a 5-year-old that just lost a tooth. So you can imagine where my position is. I'm over here. I could not imagine them leaving my house at any sort of capacity. Oh my goodness. Wow. We were talking about this earlier, right before we started this, but we were talking about how there are fewer and fewer teenagers that are in the homeschool world at that point. Why do you think that is? And what has it been like homeschooling teenagers? Because that seems like a completely different world.
So we'll start with your first question, why. I remember as my kids started getting towards the teen years, looking for other friends, like looking for other homeschoolers that were teens. And at the time we were living in a different state and weren't really finding other kids that were older. Besides that one family that we homeschooled, they had 3 boys. And so they didn't have any girls for my daughter. So she was the one that was a little bit more lonely, and she was like the oldest. So I was trying to find friends for her. We moved states and actually was able to connect with more homeschoolers that were homeschooling in high school, and they had kids that were older. And I just remember asking them, because there was a couple different families, asking them all these questions. Like I just kind of like leached onto them and would ask them all kinds of questions. And I was just trying to figure out, the homeschooling in a new state, but also just how they do high school and how did they do these beyond and college and all the things, and just asking questions and knowing that every child obviously is different, but even in high school can look so different. And so just kind of picking and choosing from what each of maybe their kids did to be able to apply to my kids. So I think the lack of homeschoolers that are older, that has been, I'm really hopeful that that trend does not continue. I'm very hopeful that parents will continue to homeschool through the teen years. I think parents get scared. They get worried that their kids aren't going to be able to get into college. Now, data shows that is absolutely not true. And so there's also this fear of my kids missing out on something. They don't get to go to prom, and they don't get to go to homecoming, or they don't, whatever it is, they're missing out on these things, or we just get scared that it's going to be too hard. Now, we don't have to know how to do all kinds of things. Like I don't need to know how to speak a different language to teach them. I can find somebody who can speak a different language. There are options online. There's so many more options now that we just feel like we have to be an expert and we have to be able to know how to do trigonometry and physics. And I need to be well-versed in, British literature. And I'm not in any of those things, but I can find resources and I can find people and I can find curriculum that are going to serve them for what they're looking for. So I think just those couple of reasons are why a lot of parents end up putting their kids into school. But as I said, I'm really hopeful that parents will continue. And I think because there's such a large amount of homeschoolers now that are younger, and I think that they're seeing that education can be different, and they're seeing that there's so many resources. So I'm really hopeful. I'm really hopeful that your generation of homeschoolers are going to continue through all of the years and not have that fear and not feel like the public school is a better option, but that homeschooling actually is a great option.
See, that's the thing. When I get past elementary school, I'm like, how are we going to jump into middle school? What does that even look like? What did that look like for y'all even? Like going from elementary, because elementary seems self-explanatory. You buy the curriculum, you work through it, and then you skip over to middle school. And I'm like, what does that even look like?
It's the same thing. So you have a 5-year-old, and so you're worried about something that's going to be when they're 12. But guess what? The age of 12 comes right after they're 11, which comes right after 10. So you get to it. And so 13 isn't scary because they've been 12 for a year. And so 8th grade isn't scary because they were in 7th grade for a year. And so it's just building upon that. And you can continue using the same curriculum. If you have specific curriculum that you like for math and you use it all the way through elementary school, you can continue using that same exact math curriculum through middle school and through high school. So it doesn't have to be anything that's completely different. So when you get to the middle school years, you'll be ready for it because you will be building up to that point. So it's not as scary as I thought it was. I would, to be honest, probably when I had a high schooler, middle schooler, and an elementary schooler, like that was probably the hardest couple of years because I was very stretched with trying to give a strong foundation to the elementary schooler. The middle schooler, that would have been my older son, and I had to keep wrangling him in, and it was just a challenge in that way. And then wanting to make sure that I got my daughter all the resources and the classes that she needed, because at that point she was leaning towards going to college. So I wanted to make sure that we met all of that criteria and had her transcripts, everything all set and in order for that. But I've become a lot more laid back and relaxed, and I can see that we can spend time in the high school years doing our core curriculum. My goal is always to make sure that they have what they need, that if they decide to go to college, that they have that. But if they don't, then that's okay too. But we spend a lot of time then honing in on their school skills and their interests and what they want to do. So my daughter, her high school, the second half of the high school years, we were kind of mostly done with her requirements. She did end up taking some college courses online. She was really interested in alternative health and nutrition. And so we just spent a lot of time on, it wasn't even homeschool curriculum. It was just finding a course online and letting her go through a course that was meant for, I don't want to say meant for adults, but there's nothing inappropriate in it. But it was it was just a course that she was interested in and just finding resources. My 20-year-old, who I said owns his own business, he was really interested in entrepreneurship. So getting him, I had him take an accounting class online and just taking a lot of different courses or books, just anything, finding him lots of resources that were going to help him and just kind of let him go, take off with it. And I actually ended up graduating him a year early. He was just done. So we got done with his core stuff. And I was like, what is he really going to do his senior year of high school? So we doubled up on English so he could get that requirement done. And then he actually spent half of what would have been his senior year on a 4-month missions trip. So nice. I was like, that's a better use of his time than just to be sitting here filling in worksheets or something like that. So yeah, so we're at the 11th grade year here with my youngest, and he's finishing up all his core subjects, and next year he'll really only have one he'll have his language arts, his English course that he has to take. Otherwise, it'll be all pretty much electives that he'll be doing, and we're kind of honing in on what does that look like for him.
Oh, wow, that is super cool. So what kind of style of learning did y'all do? Because it sounds curiosity led, like just whatever they were interested in.
Yes, I've definitely changed my approach to homeschooling. When we first began, like so many people, you start off just basically recreating the school at home because that's all you know. I only knew public school. And so I was like, well, that's what you do to educate. And so I had posters on the wall. I set up a schedule. We had all kinds of things. I had a curriculum for every single subject for every single child, and it was way too much. And so I had to start, whittling it down to what we could actually physically do in a day. And as my kids got older, I began to just trust them more. And I wish I trusted them more when they were younger, but decided, this doesn't hurt to kind of try some of these things out. And like I said, I wanted to set them up that if they wanted to go to college after high school, or if they wanted to take college courses during high school, they could do so. And so they're set up to do that, but they can pursue other things that they want as well. So yeah, so got to be more, I guess I have a balance. I'm not what people might think of completely unschooling, but I do kind of tie in both of those. And that can look different for each kid. And the really cool thing is when they really get into whatever subject they're interested in, and they know so much more about that than you do. the old show, you might be too old for this, like, I'm not smarter than a fifth grader or whatever that is. Like, it's totally true. Yeah. And I'm definitely not smarter than my kids. Now, there are things that I do know that they don't know, but in their field of interest, they know so much more than I do. And I actually think that's a good thing.
Oh, for sure. Well, and that makes them their own person too, like in society, they're adding something that's completely different than what you do to the table. What do you wish you could have told yourself back then when you first started?
Oh, I could tell myself a lot of things, but I really to chill out a little bit, to have fun and really focus on the relationship with the kids. And I had to get to that point. It's so easy to say, what would I tell myself? But I'm the type of person, if you tell me something, I'm not going to do that. Like, I'm going to do this other thing, the opposite, even more. So for me, it's best to just kind of figure it out and just to slowly change my mind on how I view things. But overall, I would just be like, chill out, girl. They're going to be okay. They're children. Have a bit more grace for them and their different personalities. And also just that, embrace the fact that they are all so very different, and not to compare, especially compare the boys. Why can't you sit still? Your sister's sitting here and she'll write this whole, report. Like, she's asking to do a research paper when she was in 5th grade, and the boys never once asked to do a research paper. So understanding that they're all a little bit different, and that's okay. But that's the public school mindset that we have, is that we have to conform. Everybody has to conform into a certain mold, and you want to fit in. And I think the cool thing about homeschooling is a lot of them don't really care. They feel confident about who they are, and they don't have to fit in. And I think other people appreciate that about them as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That sounds awesome. Oh my goodness. Like, my goodness. That gives me so much hope, honestly. And how did it change your own mindset? Because it sounds like there's a lot of breaking away from conformity for you, even as a public school kid. Because I was a public school kid too. And thankfully, I had some people that I knew that were just like, homeschooling does not look anything like that. So don't try to model that. But what did that do for you? Like, just trying to homeschool your kids? It sounds like a lot of that was broken away, just that conformity mindset.
Yes, definitely. I say often that homeschooling is, yes, it's about the kids, but it's also about the parents. And specifically, mom is the one who ends up doing most of the time with the kids. That's just how it sort of lands. And the growth that we can have to embrace the learning that we can do. I have tried to learn alongside my kids. We do, I still do with my youngest. We'll do morning time or whatever morning basket or whatever whatever you want to call it. I still just call it morning time. And we still do that together. And I've learned so much just through the different resources, the books that we have read. I've learned that learning doesn't stop. You often feel like it stops when you graduate high school, or it stops when you graduate college. I remember putting aside books after college and not reading for a couple of years because
that was me.
Yeah, reading was something that you had to do. You were told to do. I loved to read in elementary school, but then they would give you a book and tell you to write a book report about it. And I was like, can I just read the book? And can I just tell you about it? And so that's also things that I had to change. When my kids would read a book, I was like, you have to write a book report about it. How can we prove that you read this book? I mean, they could just tell me about it, or I could actually just witness them reading the book, or just trust that they read the book. I don't have to have them write something. So I do remember in the very beginning, I was like, we have to write a report about this. We have to, at least maybe do a picture and all these things that just to prove, because I was just so used to having to prove that you did what you were asked to do. And it took time. It took time. And I would say overall, homeschooling has softened myself as a mom, and I'm not as strict. And maybe it's also just kind of comes with time, and maybe it's just the baby of the family, the older two, like, he gets away with everything. No, I just realized that I was so strict about things and just let things go. Some things are not as, I don't need to hold so tightly to everything. Trust that I've imparted wisdom and truth into him, and that he's also seen, the mistakes that his older siblings have done. He's like, oh, guess I shouldn't do that.
It's funny. Oh my goodness. So what's your biggest joy? What has been the biggest thing that has brought you so much joy through the homeschooling experience?
I would say just the time with my kids and being able to watch them grow. You just get a front row seat to watch growth, not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and that time together. Whereas when kids are in school, it's just you see them for a couple of hours every day and maybe on weekends, and you're not always getting the best part of them. I got to get the best part of my kids, but I also got to get the worst part of them. But they got the best part of me, and they also got the worst part of me too. And so the greatest joy, I think, is the foundation that we have, the time that we have spent together. And I know people will be like, well, it's quality over quantity time. No, I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. You could have a ton of time together with your kids at home and you could be ignoring them and everybody could be on screens all day. That doesn't mean that your quantity time is any better. It doesn't mean you can't be on screens or you have a phone or anything like that. But it's just, it's both of those things. And I think the amount of time we were spent together and the relationships that my kids have with each other, I didn't have that with I have 3 younger brothers. I didn't have that with my brothers until we were older, like at the end of college and beyond. Now I love them dearly and I would call them friends. But at the time I didn't want to be around them and they didn't really enjoy being around me either because we lived such different lives. But my kids have been able to experience each other's highs and lows. And I just know that I remember a couple of times looking over and one of my kids maybe struggling with math or something like that. And, one of those times of like, do I step in or do I let them kind of like feel it a little bit? Or maybe I need them to get to the point to ask for help, but I would look over and their sibling would be patting them on the shoulder, or if they're just having a bad day or being in each other's lives. And it's really neat to be able to see. So my daughter's not living at home and they'll text back and forth to each other and maybe jump on a phone call once in a while. And they're all kind of pretty busy, but I just love that they enjoy being together with each other. So I'm excited for them as they step out into new seasons of life and eventually themselves have families of their own, and how close they're going to be I'm excited about that.
That's awesome. Oh my goodness. That's the one thing that I love watching. I couldn't imagine sending my kindergartner to school because right now they are just like forming all these bonds. And even today she was taking care of my toddler. And that continues is what that sounds like. That continues on as they get older and older.
Yes. Yeah, it definitely can. And it doesn't have to be the being apart all day, and they can really become each other's best friends. And friends are fine. It's fine to have friends, but to be honest, so I am 49. The friends that I had from elementary school, middle school, high school, and even in my 20s, I have one friend that I've had my entire life. And not everybody can even say that, but I mean, it goes way back. Our parents knew each other, and by the grace of God, we've been able to stay connected all of these years, but everybody else has kind of fallen aside. But my family, my siblings and stuff, and now that we're friends again, those are the people that are going to be there long term with you. And so friends are great, but it's nice to be able to have that relationship, have that foundation of your siblings. And they talk about things they want to do in the future and want to take some sibling vacations and stuff like that. And so I think, I don't know, that's just special.
That's awesome. That's super special. Even just hearing you say it, that's awesome. So the big emphasis for this podcast is raising, resilient, courageous, lifelong learners. It sounds like that's what your kids are. The lifelong learning, the fact that you poured into them. What do you think it takes to actually do that in this generation? And I'm trying to think of the right way to put this, but I saw on your stories earlier today, you were watching Joel Salatin, and he's somebody I would say, oh, he's a lifelong learner. This guy is constantly researching. I'm curious, what is this generation going to look like of homeschoolers if they continue on and they're these researchers and they're these people that are not afraid to be different? What do you think moms should be doing, I guess? And I know that's probably a little bit hard to say. What's your view on that? What is your view on raising that kind of people?
So when I first felt the call to homeschool, I didn't realize that the thought that I had in my mind was a bit cliche because, again, I had one homeschooler friend, and the process I was going through, I just kind of kept a lot to myself. But I went to a homeschool convention before I even started homeschooling. And my thought during that time was that I was like, what is my goal for this that I don't see them getting besides from homeschooling? There's a lot of things that fall into it, but I wanted to create a love of learning, and I wanted them to know how to learn. Now, this was pre-internet. I mean, maybe there was we had dial-up email at that time, but it wasn't what it is now. It's not like these phones that we, have in our hands and have, computers all on that we can access all kinds of things. So it was a lot of books. And so that was my goal, was I wanted them to love learning, because I was watching that love of learning dying in them when you have to take tests, when you have to force information in and then regurgitate it and then move on to the next thing. As I mentioned earlier, I lost that love of learning. I think kids are born with that when they're younger. And then school can very easily take that out. Now, some kids love school because they perform very well. for tests. And I think also school is just so broad. So that continuing of learning, like I was mentioning, Joel Salatin, Polyface Farms, and how much he knows. Now, he might know a lot about a lot of things, so I don't want to say that he doesn't. But if I was to come so he knows a lot about farming, probably a lot about business, probably he's written books, so probably about that. But if I was to come and ask him about the best dance moves for a ballerina, he probably isn't going to know, right? But when you're in school, you're expected to know all kinds of things about all kinds of things. And as I mentioned with my high schoolers, yes, we need to meet our state requirements, and we need to do, I felt it was important to do what we should do so that they can get into college and have those requirements. But how has God wired your brain? What are your gifts, talents, and abilities? And what are your interests? So my 20-year-old is an entrepreneur. He owns his own business. He has full-time employees. He knows all kinds of stuff about this, about workers' comp and health insurance, and just everything that goes along with that, state guidelines and payroll and accounting and hiring and firing and all those things. But if I was to ask him, what's your favorite Shakespeare play? He would tell you, I've never read a Shakespeare play because I never made him read a Shakespeare play. Because not only would that have been slightly torture for him, but it would have been slightly torture for me too. I was like, how is this going to serve him in his life? Now, as he gets older, maybe he'll be 30 and say, I think I'd like to read a Shakespeare play. Maybe he will marry a young woman who enjoys that kind of stuff and get into it. But that's of his own choosing to do that. And so I think when we become passionate about things, it's because we choose to become passionate about those things. And if, again, go back to reading a book and having to write a book report. How much do you enjoy reading a book when you have to write a book report? You're not really enjoying it. Yeah. I remember we had to, for a book report, make a cover for it, and I got to draw a picture. I was excited about that part. And I probably would have enjoyed the book if I didn't have to write the book report and have it structured in a certain way. Now, I'm not saying there's anything against writing book reports or writing papers. My daughter loved that. Like I mentioned earlier, 5th grade, she's asking to write a research paper. She'll write poetry. She'd write all kinds of things. The boys had no desire to read poetry. And so, to be honest, I didn't even make them. Again, we didn't read Shakespeare. My 11th grader, I'm going to out him right now and say he's never read Shakespeare or any great British literature. But if you were to look at my daughter's bookshelves, she has all of that because she loves it and it will serve her well, but it's not going to serve them well. So I think being a lifelong learner is having that passion and just starting and seeing where that takes you. It doesn't mean that that's where you're going to stay. So my youngest is really into videography and photography. And so we've been doing a ton of watching YouTube videos, and I've been trying to connect him with people who do this for a living or just on the side and asking questions and providing him with opportunities. He's doing videos for a local ski hill. A friend of mine is helping him with the social media, and she's like, would he like to do this? And I was like, absolutely. He loves to ski.
Oh, that's awesome.
So, giving them opportunities, and he has a drone. He has his drone pilot license, and the other two were not interested in that. So it's just as figuring out what are they interested in. Sometimes it's kind of like whatever the saying is, sometimes you got to kiss a lot of frogs to find the prince, or whatever that saying is. Sometimes with some kids, you have to try a lot of things to find out what is it that's really going to stick with them. And even if it's not something that they pursue as a career, it could be just that starting block for where they go to next.
What did it look like for him, like finding that he was interested in? How long did it take to find those little niches that they loved?
Yeah, so I would say it would start with just me observing and watching what he was interested in. It actually started off with him learning to play drums back when he was maybe 9 or 10 years old, and connecting with the drummer from our church worship team, and he would come and give him drum lessons. And so him being in the front, he would go to sit in the front row at church for the worship time to watch the drummer, to watch him play. And so getting into music. And then he started working and doing the tech as he got to be more of like a younger teen, and helping behind the scenes with things. And then connecting and him talking to people about photography and videography. And then I think he got some probably drone from Walmart when he was maybe 10, 11 years old. And it just kind of grew from that. So as parents, just doing a lot of observing and then asking questions. Would you like to know more about that? Or sometimes it's providing him. Sometimes I'd be like, hey, look at this video thing or something, and why don't you check it out? So this course that he took a course to get his drone pilot license. And it just kind of came because somebody happened to mention somebody in our church that had their drone pilot license. And so we asked him about questions, and he recommended a course. And I was like, well, what does it hurt if he tries this out a little bit? And he did it. So he loved it. It's through the FAA. It's a whole big thing. It's like a lot of legal stuff, and you have to go and do it. But just knowing that it doesn't hurt to try things out. And we've looked at different things. So with him, he has a lot of, some kids are just, or some people, my husband's like this too, are just good at a lot of different things. And so, so he's like that. I'm not like that. I'm good at the things I'm good at and not good at the things that I'm not good at. And so the youngest has been a bit more of a challenge. And so we went to a local trade school, checked out some things, and he was, yeah, it'd be cool to know how to do that. I'm like, cool to know how to do that? Or like, you want to spend the next year of your life doing this? And he's like, no, it'd be cool. Okay, then that's not what we're going to do.
No. That's funny.
So it's a lot of trial and error and a lot of observation. And especially when kids are younger and they don't have access to the internet, and we know what's out there. We know the options. We know the things that are out there. They often don't know that it's a possibility. So he's kind of a little bit into photography, and I was showing him things. And so he doesn't have access to social media. That's just by our own choice, but I do show him. So if I'm on Instagram, I'll out videos, or the algorithm will send me, because I will now save these videos, but I'll save videos about photography, videography, and it kind of gets him thinking. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that he doesn't have free access to it, because it allows him to create his own style, as opposed to copying anybody else's style, and him figuring out what it looks like for him. Like, what does he like? What doesn't he like? So he's got a couple of opportunities here in the future for that kind of stuff, and we'll see where that leads.
That's awesome. So he doesn't have social media. What does it look like with technology? How did you incorporate technology in your homeschooling, and how do you suggest parents to navigate that?
Yeah, I think it's a really personal decision. I just knew for myself. So I've been on social media. Before the homeschool stuff, I had a DIY blog. And so they were familiar with things look like behind the scenes, but they didn't have it. So it's kind of a little funny. And I hear of more and more parents being, well, I have it, and people have a business online, but their kids aren't even online. And I do see a lot of people kind of pulling back from their kids from access to it. So for us, we just made a conscious decision. I've always been more conservative when it came to what TV shows they watch, what cartoons, and all those things. I was always very, very conservative about that. And I was like, what is it? So for me, if it was going to be a movie for them to watch, does this add to their life? If it's not adding to their life, then why don't I just let them go play outside instead? Kind of thing. That was kind of my approach. And the age of my kids they were born just a few years after the influx of parents kind of handing phones over to kids. So there was enough evidence to have some reservations about it. And so always just being very conservative with our TV viewing. So he does have a phone, but it's a gab phone. It's a dumb phone, we say. It's not a smartphone. So he can call and text, and that's it at this point. I do know that iPhones have come a longer way. They've come further than they had, because now you can do a lot of parental controls on iPhones. So when we do move him to that, mostly when we have moved our kids to iPhones, it's because we want Life 360, because they forget to text when they get somewhere, and they're always fine. They've always been fine. But it's me who's thinking, I let you drive there on your own, so I don't have to drive you there. But now I don't even know if you got there. So that was kind of been the impetus for us to get our kids different phones. So my daughter has no desire for much technology. She doesn't want any social media or anything. Now, my youngest, he's in videography, photography, so he really does want this stuff. So that's also looking at it, each kid individually. She didn't really care. And we were like, you have to take this phone. You have to use this phone. So to her, it's completely just a tool to use and to be able to communicate. And I think that's wonderful. And I applaud her for that. My then 20-year-old, though, he started off very conservative with things for him, but at this point he has a business. He probably has like 5 or 6 different phones and all kinds of stuff that he just has to have access to. And so walking him through that. And then at this point, he just has to kind of know himself, and he has a lot of filters on things. And so for my youngest, though, he does have a computer that is in my husband's office. So when he goes and does his computer work for school, it's in there. So again, we've always been conservative, and I don't regret it. I don't think we will regret being conservative. I think that it needs to be balanced with a child who has no access to it. And then if they go off to college and you suddenly throw them an iPhone as you leave them in their dorm room and then leave. I think that there has to be some time of preparation and, going through, what does this look like? What does this look like as far as balance as well? But again, the iPhones too, you can put parental controls on them. You can shut down the app store where they can't put apps on there. And you can put things like we've used Covenant Eyes to be able to do filters on things. And so, yeah, I would say it's probably my least favorite thing about parenting. I wish I could go back to the 70s, 80s when maybe it was just the worst was the TV and then all you had to do was just unplug it and nobody could watch it.
Right.
Whereas now there's just a lot more. So we have to walk that line, have a lot of communication with our husbands of what does this exactly look like, and a lot of communications with them as well about the dangers of things.
I mean, even now, like with my little one, she knows that I do a podcast. She knows that I have like Instagram accounts and stuff like that. But she's always, Mom, why don't you post the videos of me? And I'm like, because, babe, there are people on the internet that don't need to see what you look like. And the longer that I think about it, what's it going to look like when I have to put a computer in front of them for a project or something like that? What is that going to look like? So the fact that you've waited so long, that is encouraging because we use screens, but very limited. So that's good to know. And it's interesting that your daughter doesn't have any desire for any of those things, which is kind of wild to me. It's awesome. This episode is sponsored by the Home Edify app. The Home Edify app was created by my husband and I as we were trying to figure out how can we store our kids' educational journeys in a digital format so that we can keep it forever. If you're like me and have toddlers, you know that a book can be destroyed in less than 10 seconds if given the opportunity to them. So I wanted something that I could put tasks in on my phone, that it would be there forever, and I could keep track of all of my kids' educational journeys as they grew. Anytime we do something educational, I type it into the app. I can plan ahead if I want to. I can check it off, and then I can get a weekly or monthly progress report sent to my email, and it tells me everything that we've done throughout the week. I can attach photos to each individual task. This has given me so much peace of mind. It has allowed me to notate things in a quick way that if I waited till the end of the day or if I waited to the end of the week, I would not be able to put it in. And on the weeks that we get sick and our schedule gets jumped around, I can go in and I can digitally move it around. This is so easy to use. It's so easily accessible and it's always there and always available. This has been a joy for me to use. And as it continues to grow and be developed, we'll be adding new features. We saw a gap in the market. We saw that there was a need in the homeschool community to have digital records. And being the lifelong learners that we are and wanting to model that for our kids, we said, okay, we're going to try to create this ourselves. And so we did. And this is our little experiment in progress that we really, really want you to be a part of if it serves you. So go to homeedify.com and there you can download the app, or you can go to the Apple Store. It's on Google. You can download the app. So don't want to take too much of your time. Just wanted to give you that little tidbit. Let's get back to the episode. With your kids, how did you build character? And what did that look like in your homeschool days?
So we were a Christian family, so we would use our biblical values to determine what that is, what is character. And when we first started homeschooling, to me, it was like, okay, we're going to teach you math and we're going to teach you how to read. We're going to teach you how to write. And it was completely just academics. And I realized, wow, I've got a captive audience here and we've got a lot of heart issues that we need to work through here. And so I was like, this can actually be a part of the day. And I'm actually here to be able to see what they're struggling with and to be able to witness the lying that's happening often, or the way they're treating each other, or their lack of gratitude. And so it became a part of our just every day that we did. I found some great resources, and they will now, all three of them will groan if I talk about stuff, and they'll make jokes about some of the resources that we use, because they're like, no, we knew we were in for it when she pulled out this one character book, and we would go through it and I would pick out a specific character trait or something. But I think it really did make an impact upon them, even though maybe they might kind of roll their eyes a little bit right now. But the blessing of being with our kids is that we can recognize where they're struggling, and we can point that out, and we can point them to God, and we can walk them through that. What does that look like? So the maybe not getting along, maybe they're teasing their sibling. Now, I don't want you to think that even though they have great relationships, that it was always perfect. But you're seeing them consistently teasing a sibling, maybe about a certain thing. And it is, we're able to see that. If they were in school, they might be picking on a kid and you might never might never know. I mean, we know there's bullies in kids, and every parent thinks that their kid is not the bully. Somebody's kid is the bully, and they're not all perfect. And so having them around and being able to then witness that and walk them through it. And at times it felt so overwhelming. Like, it would just so much easier if I just cared about their math facts and their spelling as opposed to directing and discipling their hearts. It took a lot more time, but the time was worth it. And I kept telling myself, the time is going to be worth it. It will be worth it. It will be worth it. I had to keep telling myself over and over again. And it really is. Again, kids are not perfect at all, but I see that time has been worth it. And they desire to have good character and to glorify God as opposed to trying to get away with things. I remember being in school just trying to get away with things all the time. How much can you get away with? And my kids did too. They tried to get away with things too. But when I found out that they would steal the math answer book and use that to put the answers to their math problems, then we would talk through that and there would be some discipline for that and some consequences. It's an ongoing process all the way through. And when you lay that foundation, the teen years are not as hard because they do know. Sometimes it's just hey, remember this? And they're like, yeah, I know. I was struggling with that. That was hard. And so we have that relationship too. So it's not me just standing over them, lording it over them or anything that, you're not supposed to do that. And it's more of just kind of calling them back.
Wow. It sounds like a family culture type of thing where you're embedding it into who y'all are as a family and moving from there. That's awesome. And honestly, the hardest thing I think for me personally, we go through different things and we talk about what is love. Love is patient, love is kind. We go through the scripture. But the biggest thing I think for me is not having an overly critical spirit when I go to recorrect them. And so just hearing you say that, oh, well, as you go on, you have that relationship with them and they know, and it becomes really a discipling experience. And that's awesome. So you right now are empowering women through your Little by Little homeschool, and you do mentorship. What led you to that? That seems like a ministry in and of itself. How did that happen, and what led you to that?
Most of what I do is a ministry, and I don't want to say I fell into doing the homeschool stuff, but 2020, a lot of families were questioning the school system, and in 2021, a lot were wanting to not send their kids back to school. And at that time, as I mentioned earlier, I had a DIY blog and Instagram and stuff, and I was like, what if I help these moms with homeschool? Because they knew I homeschooled and a lot were asking. So I made that switch over to that, and God has just kind of blessed it, as well as it's been really good for me in this season. I feel a little selfish because it's been such a blessing to me in this season of my life. So I have one homeschooler, and my goal is always for them to become pretty well independent with their stuff. The only thing we do together is our morning time, which is our Bible time, and we'll read a couple of other books that I think will help equip them for their current and future life. And so I have resources that we'll use for that. So really that's the only thing, and that takes maybe an hour, a little over an hour each Monday through Friday. So my homeschooling time used to be 4, 5, 6 hours a day between all 3 kids. And now it's maybe an hour a day. I'm like, what would I do with my time? Right. I would find something to do. So if I wasn't doing this, I would find something to do. But this is, I think, just in the grand scheme and overall, is just the best thing for me to be doing right now, and being able to encourage homeschool moms that it's worth it, because many times you feel like it's not worth it, or is this going to be worth the time, or you feel like you're not doing it right, you're messing it up, am I doing enough? All of these same questions that you have, everybody else has as well. Right. So I decided to start a podcast of my own, and then I do have a couple of courses and then a mentorship program where it's just me and that homeschool mom, just one-on-one, just meeting through a Zoom, and we can talk about anything that has to do with homeschool. And so that just kind of makes it a little bit more intimate, and I don't share anybody's secrets. And yeah, it's been a blessing. It's been a blessing to me, and I hope that it's a blessing to other moms as well, because I know that those who have gone before me have blessed me with books and podcasts and going to conventions and listening to speakers. That's blessed me. So I kind of feel like I'm just kind of carrying the baton, along with them now.
I gotcha. Well, I am super thankful that you do that, because every time you go and do question and answer on your Instagram, I sit there and I'm like rolling through it, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to see what kind of wisdom I can glean from this situation. So I'm super thankful for it.
Thank you.
But Any suggestions for a mom who's diving into homeschooling and maybe this is her, like me, I have a kindergartner, or maybe they're just on the fence and their kids are still in traditional schooling. What's your suggestion for them?
Yeah. So, okay. So let's go with somebody who's maybe still in school, because I would have different suggestions and different maybe input. So if your kids are still in school, and I'm going to assume that this is and so we're going to assume that you decided, yes, you want to do this and that your husband is on board as well, because sometimes it's one parent who is and one parent that is not. And that's okay. You just have to work through that. But understand that homeschool is not school at home, and that there is no one right, perfect way to homeschool. Now, there is, I would say, a perfect way, but there is not one right way. And if you're doing things differently than someone else that's homeschooling, it doesn't mean they're doing it wrong. So the right way to homeschool for every family is for each family to embrace the uniqueness of themselves and to embrace what their goals are. And their goals could be the same exact goals that somebody else has, but it's going to look different. So as you mentioned, you brought up the term family culture. I love to talk about that because every family is different. Every couple is going to be different. And when it's just you and young children, you set the pace for the home. If you're a family that loves to do outdoor adventures, then include that in your homeschool. If you're a family that enjoys cozying up by the fire and reading British literature, then include that in what you're going to do. And it doesn't mean that if you're that family that's cuddled up by the fire with tea and reading British literature, and the other family is out climbing some mountain in a half blizzard, that you're doing anything less or they're doing anything less, or that it's just as different. And it's okay for it to be different and just to embrace that. But then alongside that, also realizing that our kids are each unique as well, and trying to meet their needs. And then as parents, we want to try to meet some of their wants as well. And that goes along with the education of, as I mentioned earlier, trying to meet their wants of what does their education look like. So right now with my youngest, trying to provide him with videography and photography resources and time and making connections with people. It is pulling kids from school and starting them homeschooling can happen at any age. It can be for a 5-year-old. It can be for a 15-year-old. I've walked parents through pulling their kids from their 11th grade year of high school and just making that transition. And some of them often feel guilty. I wish I had done this earlier. We could have had more time. Don't worry about that. Worry about the time that you have right now. Just think about that time. You are getting a year together that you weren't going to have together. So I would say just to take some time to let go of your preconceived notions. The term that is often used is deschooling. So do some research, look into that. What does that look like? And understand that that is a long process. And it's a process that sometimes kids have to go through as well. So think of the high schooler. They're going to have a lot more deschooling to do. And sometimes those kids can be very resistant to homeschooling because they're like, this is not what my teachers did. And even younger kids can do that as well. But depending upon the time that they're in school and how much maybe they loved or how much school is something that kids get used to, and it feels safe and comfortable. And so when you pull kids home, not that home doesn't feel safe and comfortable, but when you tie that with education, you're like, where are the tests? Why are you not standing at a whiteboard teaching me? And when's recess? And, just the structure of the day is different. Be something that you have to work through with kids. And so each kid is different. You could have a child that's so excited to be homeschooled, never looks back, doesn't even think about school. And then you could have one that really struggles, and neither is right or wrong. You just kind of have to meet them where they're at, acknowledge how they're feeling, and walk them through that. So hopefully that answered that part of the question.
As we close up, one thing that I like to ask, because I consider all homeschool moms or whoever, all parents in general should be lifelong learners. What is one book that has shaped your adulthood and made you into the person that you are, that you would recommend to anybody that is listening?
Yeah. So when you mentioned this question, I was like, okay, so or what season of life, and does this have to do with parenthood or marriage? Because I have favorite books from every single genre. So I went and looked on my bookshelf, because not all books that I have read we have moved a couple of times since I got back into reading after a few years of taking off after college, and a couple of bigger moves. And so if the books weren't worth it, they didn't make the cut. And so, because when we moved different states, my husband was like, we are very book heavy. Do we need all of these books? And so I had to really pare them down. And so now I'm building back up my book collection. So I was kind of going through, and so I was trying to think of a general one. So I won't go with a homeschool mom book, which is maybe, is that what you're hoping that I would give it, a homeschool mom book? Or
it can be literally anything. Okay. It can be C.S. Lewis. It can be anything. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Okay. Well, so obviously, I mean, the first one would be the Bible and how that has been something that I've read it through all the different ages and stages and seasons of life. But I remember
Right.
coming across a book. There was quite a few years that our budget for such things was very, very small. And I remember going into a local Lifeway bookstore and finding a book on so I'd have to go like the clearance rack or something. So, maybe this book had been out for a little bit and that's why it was on the clearance rack. But it was called The Resolution for Women. So this is an older book. I would say probably maybe 15 years old or something. So going through the book, I realized that the insecurities that I had as a woman wasn't just me. That it was, I remember reading and I was like, did she write this book just for me at this season and in life? And I'm not sure if I had all three kids at that point or not, but I might have had at least two kids, but just feeling so insecure in my body, in my friends, in my relationship to God, my parents and my husband, and just feeling exhausted all the time. And so reading through that book, I was like, wow, I feel seen. I don't know. So that would be the one general book that I would give. You might be able to find it like on thrift books or something like that. I'm not sure if it's on Amazon or anything.
Nice. Yeah, my mom used to take me in the Lifeways as a kid. So I remember like that was when they were like the brick and mortar.
Yes,
store,
my kids will too. We'll talk about it too because they remember that a time that there was not there and they were it was there. And so in the back they had little chairs and they had a couple little toys and then they would have a TV with Veggie Tales or something.
Yep.
So I loved it because I got to go and look at books and my kids would just sit there and watch it. And I knew that they were in the back in the corner. And so they couldn't get out of the store and nobody could get to them. I was in the middle there. But yes, yeah, that's so fun that you remember that too. My kids have some stories too.
That's funny. No, and what's funny, me and my husband, we talk about how our moms took us to Lifeway. Well, and I lived the closest place to me that had a Lifeway was the same one that he would go to, even though we're like 4 hours apart. So we make the joke that there was probably a chance where we were sitting there watching Veggie Tales together at some point, and our moms were shopping in the store.
Oh, that is so fun. That's such a neat story.
Oh yeah. Well, Miss Leigh, thank you so much for hopping on here. I learned so much, and I know everyone listening will too. So if you want to follow Leigh Nguyen, she is on Instagram with Little by Little Homeschooling. You also have a website where like if somebody's interested in getting some mentorship, they can hop on there and find a way to communicate with you. I know you have different packages that you have and courses, but thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else you'd like to share before we close out?
No, I would just like to thank you. This has been a blessing. You are an absolute sweetheart, and I'm so excited about you and just everybody that's homeschooling. It's exciting. It really is to me because even though everything 2020 and all the hardness that came from it, I think it really is turning things for good. And even though even now you like look out into the world and you can just feel so overwhelmed by everything, I actually recommend just turning off the TV and turning off the news and I just live a more peaceful, joyful life, not knowing most stuff. But I think that it's really caused a lot of parents to be more intentional in the raising and the educating of their children. And so I'm really excited. I'm excited even about the generation of kids that I have. I guess they're all three would be Gen Z. And I'm just excited about the strength that they have and the resolve that they have. And it's good. There's good times. I mean, we're not guaranteed good times in the Bible, but there's just a lot of good because of it. And I'm seeing these kids. I'm so excited. Like, so you have a 5-year-old. I mean, in 15 years, I mean, I'm not trying to fast forward time, but like 20, like so strong. Like it's just going to be, and they're just going to you're having such an impact upon the generation that you guys are raising, and they will have an impact upon the next generation. And it's going to be amazing. I'm excited. I'm excited to watch it. I'm watching it right now and I love it.
No, I am too. I'm super excited because dude, the world is changing so rapidly fast. But honestly, the foundation that your generation has set for us has been so good. And so I know all of us are super excited that there are people in our corners that are Leigh Nguyen's out there. Thank you for listening to the Home Edify podcast. All literature, book recommendations, and websites mentioned in today's show will be linked in the details below. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and YouTube. And don't forget to follow along on Instagram at Home Edify Podcast to enjoy clips from our latest episodes and day-to-day encouragement. Our prayer is that you were inspired to seek after your child's heart and mind. Thanks again for listening.
So, Mom, are you done with your podcast?
Yeah, I learned so much.
Thanks for coming to the podcast.